Good morning, and thank you for joining Hudson Institute for this discussion on events in Venezuela. My name is Daniel Batlle, and I'm an adjunct fellow with Hudson Institute. Today, we have a distinguished group of speakers to discuss prospects for change in Venezuela in light of intensifying repression, the exile of President-elect Edmundo Gonzalez, and other developments. Carla Angola is a veteran Venezuelan-American journalist and currently an anchor for TVV in Miami. Jesús Armas is joining us from Caracas, where he is a member of Maria Corina Machado's campaign staff. And José Cárdenas is a former assistant administrator for Latin America at the USAID, has been a leader on this issue in Washington. So thank you to each of you for joining us today. And José, I'd like to get started with you. Can you provide an overview of recent developments and describe where things stand now and how you see the current state of play?
Sure. Thank you, Dan, and thank you for the invitation to be here with illustrious co-panelists to talk about a timely and an incredibly important issue for U.S. interests in the Western Hemisphere. I think that to begin with, I would say that what happened on July 28th, that is the presidential vote in Venezuela, the Venezuelan people did nothing short of shock the world. They overcame a tremendous amount of obstruction, obstacles, and downright intimidation and pressure from the Maduro regime to come out and vote they did. The planning by the opposition and what has basically the game changer of this election was the incredible organizing effort that the opposition did to put people in each voting precinct where they were able to, on their own, collect the voting tallies from each machine, and called in Spanish the actas. And by either photographing on their cell phones or walking away from the precinct with the voting tallies, they were able then to send them to a central location where they were able to, they basically collected about 80% of the voting booths, the results from the voting booths in the country, and they found that Edmundo Gonzalez, who you mentioned at the outset, Dan, defeated Nicolas Maduro by nearly double, 67% roughly to 30%. Now, what that did was that immediately put the regime on the defensive. They went into this election thinking that they had it won because of all of the dirty tricks that they had imposed on the opposition. But the opposition's tallies confronted the regime, and they did not release their own results. All they said was, "We won." And they expect the world to accept that. And so that was the first step in basically opening up this moment in Venezuela where the people definitively rejected the Maduro regime, but the Maduro regime today is absolutely rejecting the results that the opposition's produced. These results have been reviewed by independent auditors and reviewers, and no one has been able to find any conflict with the data they produced. Now you have countries basically at the outset demanding that the regime release their own actas of what they have, and they have not. This has led to a groundswell of opposition, not only in the region, but we're seeing it right now at the UN General Assembly, where a number of events are taking place, all demanding that the regime respect and recognize the results of this election. They are not. They refuse to. And that has set up this present conflict.
Jesus, I want to turn to you. I really appreciate your being with us, especially considering the risks involved in speaking out. Can you describe the human rights situation in Venezuela and talk about the repression that you and other members of the democratic opposition are facing right now?
Of course, Daniel. Thank you so much to have this opportunity to talk about the situation of human rights and the political situation of my country. So right now is a very hard moment for all the opposition because just after the election, Nicolás Maduro showed his worst face. Actually, he started the most brutal repression in the history of our country, and maybe in the worst repression in the history of the last 50 or 40 years in Latin America. In just a few days, the political police, the army, the paramilitary groups that are controlled by Nicolás Maduro killed more than 20 people just for raising their voice against the dictatorship, just for goes to the street in a pacific way to fight for democracy, to fight for the real results of the elections. Right now, we have almost 2,000 people jailed, almost 2,000 political prisoners that are not in a special jail for political prisoners. No, they are right now between murders, between rapers, between the worst criminals, the most dangerous jails in our country. Even many of these political prisoners right now are less than 18 years old. They are almost child. So that's the situation with our prisoners. But at the same time, a lot of political leaders right now in Venezuela are in hiding. Maria Corina Machado is in a safe house. Myself, I'm in a safe house right now. We are all in secret locations, trying to avoid a detention, avoid to be kidnapped by the Nicolás Maduro regime. We have seen different episodes of repression. For example, this member of the army, or maybe the Nicolás Maduro personal Gestapo, which is called SEBIN, have go to the houses of many different political leaders, from community leaders to national leaders, to try to kidnap them. Some of them have been in their homes and have been taken. And every time we go to the streets to raise our voice, there's a high probability to be kidnapped by the regime. So the situation right now of the political prisoners, it's also extremes in other ways. There are some registers made by a human rights organization about sexual and physical aggressions, torture. So what Venezuelans are living right now is really a tragedy, Daniel.
Yeah, I think it's notable that the most recent human rights report, which was put out by a group of Venezuelan NGOs, was published anonymously, whereas in the past these these types of reports had gone out under the name of the organizations and often with the names of the authors. But to me, that is sort of a clear sign of how things have changed. And I think it's also worth noting, Maria Corina Machado in an interview the other day spoke of the extreme loneliness that she's facing, such a shift from the period of the campaign where she was surrounded by people every day. I imagine that is something that you and others are also experiencing.
Yes, of course. And actually, it's not just ourselves. It's not just the political leaders. It's also their families. Actually, a few minutes ago, the Nicolás Maduro Gestapo, El SEBIN, kidnapped a brother of a big political leader, an important political leader of the Venezuelan opposition. I'm not allowed to reveal his name right now, but that is what we are living every day.
Carla, I realize no one knows exactly what the people in the Maduro regime are thinking, but can you provide some insight on what might be driving their actions, and what we might expect in the coming months?
Yes. First of all, thank you for having me here. The first thing that I want to share is Venezuelans did everything they were asked to do by the international community before 28th of July. They competed without having any guarantee in an election that was neither free nor fair, and nevertheless they won. The world couldn't find any concession for the opposition before 28th of July. They couldn't even compete with their main candidate, who was Maria Corina Machado, even after it was stated in the Barbados Agreement that the opposition could choose their own nominee. This is just one of many violations. But instead, the Biden administration did give Maduro's regime many concessions. They gave them back their narco nephews and their so-called main figurehead, Alex Saab. As you see, they gave Maduro what he most wanted before the 28th of July. Now, after he crushed the popular sovereignty, the world cannot allow for the opposition, which is now the new government-elect, to be in worse conditions than they were before the election. Or what does the world pretend for Maria Corina to do now? To keep in her hideout until January 10th under the threat of being kidnapped at any moment by the regime, as Jesus said? My question is how the world is going to protect her after she, as well as Venezuelans, have done everything they have been told. This is the question. And how the Maduro's regime works. Well, what Maduro fears the most is the international isolation, the lack of legitimacy, and not being able to make business with a world who can no longer be apathetic to his crimes. It will be unsustainable for Maduro to keep himself in power while the world is willing to do what has not yet been done. In fact, the Argentine justice system has just issued a warrant arrest against 16 military personnel responsible for crimes against humanity in Venezuela. They have already made a request to Interpol for a red alert against all of them. They are applying the principle of universal justice. These are the aggressive measures that the international community should apply to make Maduro's world smaller and smaller. In fact, 70 countries can apply this universal justice to sentence the perpetrators of so many crimes in Venezuela, with judges from their own countries. Among those 70 countries is the United States. The United States can also go deeper into the indictments against members of the regime. The world does not have to wait for the International Criminal Court to issue arrest warrants, which it should do immediately. They can start cornering Maduro right now. But how the regime works, I can give you a few notes. Before July 28th of this year, Diosdado Cabello was under Maduro's control, and Maduro made sure that he lost power and that he went from being the second most important in the regime to being the fifth. After this 28th of July, Diosdado increased his power exponentially, because Maduro now doesn't depend on neither the National Assembly, led by Jorge Rodriguez, nor the armed forces led by Vladimir Padrino, not even by the Supreme Court, which is led by his own wife. He depends exclusively on the radical and extremist control by Diosdado Cabello. We're talking about the pro-regime paramilitary groups called colectivos, as Jesus said before, the National Guard, National Police, extermination groups such as Daet, and the torturing branch of the regime, which are DGCIM and SEBIN. In the last couple of years, the desertion in the armed forces have increased by 40%, as well as the voluntary discharges have increased 50% just last year. General Padrino has maybe 2,000 generals, but no troops. That's why the repression is so cold-blooded. Some calculated that there are at least 1,300 insurgents from the Colombian guerrilla group ELN in Venezuela. I haven't been able to confirm this independently, but some said that there could be mercenaries from Cuba, Russia, Bolivia, Nicaragua as well. There could even be confrontation between Diosdado Cabello and Padrino Lopez, because Diosdado has never forgiven Padrino Lopez for negotiating with the US. Diosdado knows that the repression is the only tool that Maduro has in order to keep himself in power. So if Diosdado is who controls the repression groups, then it's Diosdado who seems to have power over Maduro now. And it seems the correlation of powers is shifting in Venezuela. So when the US and international community think about negotiating with the regime, they have to keep in mind that they are dealing with the most vicious wing of the regime.
Dan, can I just pick up on, if I may, on what Carla and Jesús basically
Please, absolutely.
Is that, you know, they both have, you know, honestly and graphically demonstrated what the regime's response has been to July 28th. We have already spoken about how the opposition beat all the odds by winning, and are now demanding recognition of the result. The response of Maduro has been absolutely not only to crack down and elevate the repression, but also, as Carla just said, to consolidate its control within Chavismo. And that is reflected most, as Carla said, in the elevation of Diosdado Cabello to interior minister. This is the heavy of the heaviest in the hardline repressive wing of this regime. He is now in charge of internal security. So that is emblematic of the response of the regime to the opposition's victory on July 28th, is cracking down. And we can get to this later, but it is one of the offshoots of this is to produce what we all will regret seeing is probably another outward migration surge from Venezuela.
Thank you, Jose. Yeah, so just to follow up on what Carla mentioned with armed forces perhaps being a little less central to Maduro's control, you know, does that create any opportunities if senior leaders in the military feel that they have been sidelined?
Can I jump in?
Please.
Yes.
Okay.
Please.
Well, I think that this is a great opportunity because Maduro doesn't have legitimacy anymore. He's not the president, and the army knows it. Actually, in Venezuela, in the day of the election, there's a member of the army in every poll center. So they saw the results. They know the truth. I want to tell you something. The day of the election, Nicolás Maduro gave the order to the army to try to stop the opposition to get the tallies. These receipts that shows the result of every poll station in the country. So in many different places of the country, the army even helped the opposition and the witness of the opposition to get these tallies. So the army knows the majority of the troops wants a change in Venezuela, but they are also afraid because there are spies between the army. And actually, if Maduro is hard with the opposition, it's his repression is harder between the members of the army. If you are a member of the army and you get caught trying to fight for the constitution or for the freedom in Venezuela, probably you will end up jailed, tortured, or even killed. the tortures are harder to the members of the army. So I think that Maduro is really weak right now. He only has repression, and he don't control the repression. In the moment when the Venezuelan people understood that Nicolás Maduro is not a legal president anymore, he lost his power, and right now he's kind of a hostage of Diosdado Cabello and Padrino Lopez. This is not a civil government anymore. This is more like a military dictatorship.
Thank you. And Carla, I want to give you an opportunity to address that as well.
Thank you, Daniel. I think that what can make Maduro's circle betray him is the pressure. When I said the international community had to act vehemently, what I meant is that the punishment which is inflicted on Maduro and his thugs for their crimes against humanity, for example, and the kidnapping of American, Spanish, and even Czech citizens had to be at least equivalent to the danger that he represents, not only for Venezuelans, but for the whole world. This has become an universal crisis. If Maduro plays hardball, there has to be a retaliation with the same severity. The international community might even have to do things they don't want to do, such as acting as a whole and emit aggressive and individual sanctions to not just Maduro, but anyone who has taken advantage of the money they have stripped away from Venezuelans after making them suffer these unimaginable manners by torturing, persecuting, assassination, and disappearing them forcibly, as Jesus has been describing. These individual sanctions have to be issued to the wives, the lovers, the kids, the enablers, and the figureheads, or anyone who dares to make business with them and uses this blood money. After, for example, after the US alone, these opposition leaders, Maduro and a couple of other countries signed the Barbados Agreement based on the alleged good faith of the regime, the US lifted some oil sanctions. So Maduro would allow a presidential election. But Maduro did not only care less about what was signed in this Barbados Agreement, but he also overthrew the elected president after clearly losing this election. The US reimposed oil sanctions, but on the other hand, gave individual permission to oil companies around the world to make business with Maduro. So what's the point of this so-called punishment? Now, after 4 years, the Biden administration imposed, that's true, 16 individual sanctions to regime perpetrators. But this is scanty. Now we wonder, for example, why Carlos Malpica Flores, Cilia Flores, Maduro's wife's nephew, is not again on the list. Remember, this was a concession made to Maduro, but Maduro once again scammed the US. The US has to act with the same fury as they did against Russian oligarchs, and the same toughness they applied, for example, against the ones who wanted to block President Arévalos' rise to power in Guatemala. In fact, right now, Delcy Rodriguez is in Russia, is in Moscow. And yesterday, Maduro's Minister of Foreign Affairs had a meeting with one of the leaders of the Russian regime. This is the key factor here. The international community acting as a whole. And in this way, just in this way, put the most aggressive pressure against Maduro's regime.
Jose, how would you characterize the Biden administration's approach? And I'd love to hear you address Carla's point about the need for collective action on Venezuela.
Yes. So, Carla set it up perfectly, is that last October, almost a year ago, the United States basically oversaw the signing of what became known as the Barbados Agreement. And in that agreement, the regime did make some commitments to, again, some semblance of a free and fair process. They did not comply. And the point here is that the Biden administration has time and time again put its credibility on the line to ensure that there would be some semblance of a free and fair process, and time again made unilateral concessions to the Maduro regime. Now, despite all those obstacles, as we know, the opposition overcame them. They overcame the grossly unequal playing field for the election, and they won. So it's kind of unusual, it's kind of strange to see what I would call an overly cautious approach by the Biden administration. They are on the cusp of achieving a policy victory in Venezuela after taking a lot of criticism for the things that Carla mentioned, the concessions and the freeing of corrupt Venezuelans from U.S. custody. And you would think that the Biden administration would be more active to seal the win, and that is make it impossible for Maduro to continue in power. But they have instead, as I noted, been very cautious. They have not. The only move so far is levying some new international sanctions. Some new individual sanctions against those associated with corrupting the political process in Venezuela. The elephant in the room are the oil sanctions, which I believe it is inescapable that the administration has to return to Trump-era sanctions on oil in Venezuela. It makes no sense that we are allowing international oil companies to subsidize a regime that is not only stolen an election, but is repressing the people to a degree, as Jesus mentioned, that is unprecedented in the country. So I think that one of the complications in this scenario is that, unfortunately, our own here in the US, our own electoral calendar is getting entangled in Venezuela policymaking. I think that the administration is being extremely cautious about not doing anything that would, again, unduly affect our own election in this country. That is, doing something that won't backfire against the vice president's campaign or anything of that nature. I think that the administration is looking to January 10th, which is the official transfer of power under the Venezuelan constitution, the regime's own constitution. But unfortunately, there is too much happening on the ground to wait any longer. Day by day, people are either being hurt, harmed, killed, or they are getting ready to leave again and create another migration crisis for the United States. And as Carla said, they are shoring up their malign alliances with Russia, China, Iran, Cuba. There is too much happening on the ground as we speak to be so cautious and deliberate in our policy. We need to raise the costs immediately to Maduro, raise the costs of his remaining in power so that he has no choice.
Thank you, Jose. And I want to stay on the topic of oil sanctions for a minute. One of the possible reasons for caution on this is fear of a new exodus. But I'd like to get Jesus's sense on that, because you are there and you are talking to people every day, and I would love to get your perspective on what the impact of sanctions might be, and how the Democratic opposition thinks about this.
Thank you, Daniel. First, I want to make a point. So in my opinion, there are two global issues that especially the Western world has to lead and has to take all the efforts. First, of course, is climate change, but the second is the fight against authoritarianism. The authoritarianism is rising all around the world, and I think that right now, the two most important fields of battles are, of course, Ukraine and Venezuela. To win democracy for Venezuela, it's not only about the Venezuelan people, it's also about democracy all around the world. To defeat Nicolás Maduro and to bring back freedom to Venezuelans, it's to defeat Vladimir Putin, it's to defeat the Iran, Cuba, and Nicaragua regime, is to defeat Xi Jinping. So I think that the Western world should focus on how they can use all the political tools, all the diplomatic tools to help us to bring back democracy on Venezuela. Saying that, I want to talk about the sanctions. The economical crisis in Venezuela started many years before the sanction. Actually, before Donald Trump was in power, Venezuela lost 70% of the GDP. So the biggest sanction that Venezuela has is the Nicolás Maduro regime. So Nicolás Maduro, during many years, have stupid, but really stupid economical policies like exchange control, that prices control. He installed a fight against private property. He was persecuting business all around the country. So he also broke the oil industry of Venezuela. We used to produce more than 3 million of oil barrels per day, and right now we produce less than 900,000, less than 1 million barrels per day, and that's not because of the sanction. That's because Nicolás Maduro changed all these technicians, engineers, and experts of management experts of the oil company with his loyalists, people that knows maybe about politics or about Marxists, but doesn't know anything about oil. This oil industry is broke because of the corruption. Nicolás Maduro's regime is maybe the most corrupt regime in the history of Latin America. And Venezuela is in this humanitarian crisis because of Nicolás Maduro, not because of the sanctions. Actually, right now, I think that the US and Europe, even Latin America, should impose more sanctions, individual sanctions to the people of the regimes, as Carla said, but also sanctions to the oil industry. They must revoke the concessions to companies as Chevron. Chevron represents a good part of the cash flow of Nicolás Maduro, and this money doesn't go to healthcare, to education, to social program, no, or to infrastructure, to water supply, energy supply for Venezuela, no. This money goes to the army. This money goes to weapons, to repression, to the elite of Nicolás Maduro's regime. So I think we need more pressure on Nicolás Maduro to find a way to negotiate with the regime and to open a great opportunity for democracy in Venezuela. But also, I want to make a reflection for the international oil companies like Chevron, Shell, and many others that have a great interest to invest in Venezuela. I want to tell you that the only way for all these companies to have Venezuela as a great partner is that Venezuela have a path to a transition for democracy in the country, because we can offer rule of law, we can offer a more business-oriented policies, we can offer an open market for them and create opportunities, because we know that we need those investments to recover the oil and the gas industry in Venezuela and many other industries. And at the same time, they know that we are serious people and that we understand the necessities of the international capital for investment. So yeah, I think that we are the best interest for the Venezuelan people, but also for all those companies that want to invest in Venezuela. So yeah, I mean, I want to clarify something. If Maduro stays in power, it's impossible to recover, for example, the electricity, the power sector in Venezuela. And without electricity, there's no capacity to increase the oil production in Venezuela. So that's a good example of why the world or the people that want to invest in Venezuela needs a democratization.
Thank you, Jesus. I think you provide an invaluable perspective there. Carla, would you like to jump in on this question?
Yes, of course. I will disagree a little bit with Jesus, with Jesus, just in a tiny point, because I think that Maduro did not design a stupid economic policy, but one that was absolutely premeditated to sink Venezuelans into misery, so he could control them and plunder all their wealth. This was the main objective of this regime since the beginning. And on Chevron, what does the US, Chevron, Repsol, and Eni have to say to Venezuelans who believe that they have been purchasing what we could call blood oil from Maduro, and that with the money earned from these transactions, they would be turning into sort of co-founders of the repression against the defenseless citizens, as Jose said before. And I want to add this topic because the US Senate has proposed a bill which is named Stop Maduro. That will increase the reward put on Maduro for any information that can lead to his capture, right? In 2019, the reward was put on at $15 million, and now the Senate wants to increase it to 100 million. As we can see, they are raising the stakes because they know that this is not a war between democracy and a dictatorship. This is far past that already, as Jesus said. Maduro is not just a tyrannical usurper that is trying to hide his brutal defeat on the 28th of July, but this drug trafficker portrayed in the South District of New York indictment. The Senate is treating him as a criminal, meaning they believe the measures taken against him have to be the same as those taken against a criminal who tries to flood the United States with the cocaine as disclosed in this indictment. And I want to add this. Since 1986, the US has offered less than 200 million for 90 people who are at large for crimes as corruption, narco trafficking, and terrorism. The US has been criticized because the reward for this kind of criminals is petty in comparison of the tons of money which these crimes can amass in a year or even in a week. To give you an example, El Chapo Guzman's fortune, according to a New York Times investigation named Cocaine Incorporated, maybe you remember that, reached $3 billion every year. So we're looking at $250 million a month, and the reward put out on him was just $5 million. As I mentioned before, the reward put out on Maduro is at $15 million after an investigation in 29 countries. Just half of the money this regime could have made reaches close to $67 billion. And we're only talking about half of the money. And it is already 2 times what El Chapo Guzman made every year. it is said that Mexican and Colombian cartels make between 18 and maybe $39 billion every year. So this means Maduro makes twice this amount. Mind you, we are just talking about half of the actual money accrued.
Thank you, Carla. Earlier, you raised the question of individual sanctions. So far, the number of people sanctioned has been quite small relative to some other recent cases. Is there a case for a much larger number of individuals to be sanctioned, and what would be the practical effect of that?
Sure. In fact, I'm sorry, Jose. Go, please.
No, I'm sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say that I think that this opportunity here with the individual sanctions is very, very important to, create fissures in the regime. But it can't just be saying that this person can't travel to the United States or that it can't do business in the U.S. financial system. I think what the administration needs to do, we need to take that a step further. We need to name and shame them, but then we need a task force that will find their assets held abroad. As both Jesús and Carla have said, that this is corruption central. Billions have been stolen from the Venezuelan people by this regime and the people that populate it. That money is being held in foreign accounts all over the world. We need to find it. And we need to expose all of these criminals within Venezuela that are basically profiting off the misery of the Venezuelan people. That is one tactic to, again, try and drive fissures within the cupola of this regime and pit military against military, secret police against secret police, whatever. But we need to get serious, because as Carla and Jesús have said, what happens in Venezuela does not stay in Venezuela. It has become a hub for transnational criminal activity. It is the forefront of the global battle against authoritarianism. We've already talked about the migration crisis. We've already talked about the malign influences. In the United States over the past week, we've been talking about Iran's threats against the against former President Donald Trump, against his life, his assassination attempts. Well, right now, the U.S. government is also putting out notices and warnings that some of those people involved are coming in and out of Venezuela, because that's the kind of relationship that Venezuela maintains with our enemies. So again, for any American who thinks, why do we need to be preoccupied by what's happening in Venezuela, is because what happens there has very much to do with the safety and security of our own country.
Thank you, Jose. Carla, over to you.
Well, I understand that these sanctions by the Biden administration are just the beginning, or at least that's what Venezuelans hope, right? But I will give you another example, another idea on who you can persecute. For example, Celia Flores controls the judicial branch, and we have received information from the core of this branch that Celia Flores selects, for example, the people with the last knowledge and the last academic capabilities, so that they could be the most submissive, manipulative, corruptive, and obedient puppets that have no free will at all. Celia assigns roles in the judicial branch to her daughter-in-law, her bodyguard's daughter, as well as her nephew's friends. On the other hand, she assigns her bodyguards as her figureheads. And at the same time, these incompetent people who become judges apply the same nepotism and assign their own kids to be servants of the regime just as they are. This is a whole list of accomplices of the regime that you can choose in I hope, more and more list of sanctions, individual sanctions from this Biden-Harris administration.
Thank you. I have a question about the timeline. This is for anyone on the panel, but a lot of the discussion about Venezuela has been sort of premised on a January 10th inauguration, and I have wondered if that is sort of, if there's been a misplaced focus on that date, given that this may be a very long struggle. I would love to get love to get a sense from each of you on that question.
Well, I'll just say something very quick, Dan, to kick it off. I think that January 10th basically represents the end of a patina of institutionality, because Maduro theoretically still has until January 10th to concede and hand over power per the Constitution. Now, that date, the institutional date, I have spoken to some Venezuelans. I don't know if Jesús and Carla agree, but they think that that date could be significant for the institutional military, those that are not corrupt and bought into the regime, that profit from basically corruption and drug trafficking, as Carla has said. There is a thought out there that perhaps some of the military that are independent and still adhere to the Constitution could act on January 10th if, against all odds, once again, if Maduro fails to recognize the opposition victory. So I think that, and that also, I believe, is governing the approach of the Biden administration. I think that they think they have until January 10th to, again, force Maduro to abide by the election result and concede power, allow the transfer of power. Now, as we said before, the problem with that is that there are too many things happening now that will make it even less possible that Maduro would ever concede defeat and would ever allow a peaceful transition of power. So that is the problem. And I think that the Biden administration ought to, again, as our other guests have been saying, is ramp up the pressure. We have to continue driving up the costs. The Biden administration's approach, to me, looks like they want to incentivize Maduro to do the right thing by promising sanctions relief if he systematically begins to recognize a transition of power. I don't think he can be incentivized. He's not driven, as Jesús said, by how much money is available coming in, foreign investment, et cetera, et cetera. They are obsessed with absolute power. So I think that the only thing that can be done is, rather than trying to incentivize Maduro to leave through sanctions relief, it is to drive up the costs of his intransigent behavior. That is the only thing that they are going to understand.
Thank you. Carla?
Well, Petro said that Maduro will proclaim himself on January 10th, but not if the international community prevents it, with all the tools that we have been describing today. If that does happen, or if that does not happen, we will begin an even tougher phase, and the international community and the Western Hemisphere would put their own democracy at risk, because The message would be that anyone can lose an election and not recognize it, and the popular vote would be useless. First and foremost, the Biden and Harris administration, as well as the international community in general, including the European Union, have to quit asking Maduro to turn in or show publicly the tallies of votes, because we know this won't happen, since the original tallies proved that he was badly defeated and put to shame after the country manifested their deep loath towards him. Secondly, they have to respond as ferociously as Maduro always does, as I said before. These sanctions that were emitted by the Trump administration in 2019 were the key factor for the Biden administration to be able to make a juicy and appealing offer for Maduro to at least accept to sit at the negotiation table. This is how the international community and the opposition, led by Maria Corina Machado, were able to drag Maduro into an election scenario. We can permit that this cause is, it will be a lost cause, or become a lost cause. We can't afford that. Nor Venezuelans, nor international community.
Thank you. Jesus, I want to end with you and get your comment both on January 10th, but also on the significance of another date, September 28th, and what you hope to see happen on September 28th.
Daniel, so as I tell you before, we have lived through the most brutal days of the Venezuelan history. But at the same time, I think that Venezuelans have shown that we are a brave people. People from Venezuela wants to keep the fight for democracy. Nobody has surrendered here. But right now we are in the process of the reorganization of our forces, trying to be prepared for January. I think that the second most important thing in this battle is the international community and what the international community can do. But the most important thing is what Venezuelans can do in this battle. So I think that we need to win strength again and to be ready to go to the streets on January. So we are trying to use this demonstration that we are going to have on September 28th. First, to show the world in this week that it's really important because of the UN General Assembly, that Venezuelans all around the world keep the fight for democracy and raise their voice for freedom, and that we have the proof that Nicolás Maduro is not the elected president of Venezuela. But at the same time, for me, the most important thing is that we are going to use this day to start to organize again in a community level. We don't expect like a big demonstration on this Saturday. You know, is to the human cost of the big demonstrations are too high for us right now. But I think that we're going to have many small demonstrations all around the country, 20, 30, 40 people. That's going to be a first step to be prepared for January. And I know that in January we are going to be on the street because the anger and the hope that Venezuelan people is feeling right now is going to move all the country to the streets and all Venezuelans to this fight, not only in Venezuela, but all around the world.
Can I add something, Daniel? Mm-hmm. I think that Venezuelans around the world have to be there more than ever. Much more now that Venezuelans within the country may not be able to express the truth that they represent. because of this persecution that has become evident. It is our responsibility to tell the world that this fight is until the end, and that we will not accept that the international community settle for a different scenario than seeing Edmundo González in power.
I totally agree with Carla, and I want to say that if we lost this battle, it's a battle lost for the democracy values all around the country. If we lost this battle, this is a win for Xi Jinping, this is a win for Vladimir Putin, this is a win for authoritarianism. So the international community has to fight with us, and we need to bring back democracy to Venezuela.
Thank you for those words. On that note, I want to close this discussion, but clearly there's a lot that bears watching here. Clearly a greater need for urgency, both in how the United States responds, as well as how other democracies respond. And in particular, I'm interested in José's thought about a task force to, provide more structure and impact for any further sanctions that are implemented. But I want to thank each of you for joining us today. I want to commend you for the work that you do on a daily basis, and Jesus especially. I would appreciate if you could transmit to your colleagues our support and wish you the best in all that you do, and especially in the events this weekend. Thank you.